urgency is the force that moves people from hesitation to action. It's the difference between a life of regret and a life of impact. And right now, as Christians, we must understand that time is not an unlimited resource. Every day, every hour, every moment is an opportunity to step deeper into our faith, to be the light God has called us to be. But here's the truth. Most people live as if they have all the time in the world. They say, I'll pray more tomorrow, I'll serve the church next month, or I'll get serious about my purpose later. But later isn't promised. Think about this. If Jesus were standing right in front of you and said, I have a mission for you and it's urgent, would you wait? Would you say, let me get my life together first, or let me make sure I feel ready? No, you'd move instantly. Because when we know something is urgent, we prioritize. We stop making excuses. We shift our focus. And that's exactly what we need to do with our faith, with our calling, with the impact God has placed on our hearts. Let me tell you something. Urgency is what separates those who live with purpose from those who merely exist. Look at the great figures of faith. Noah didn't wait until the rain started falling to build the ark. He acted before the flood came. Moses didn't wait until he felt like a great leader. He moved when God called him. The disciples didn't wait for a better time to follow Jesus. They dropped everything and went immediately. What if they had delayed? What if they had waited? The course of history would have changed. Now, let's bring this to you. What is it that God has been whispering to your heart? What dream, what mission, what calling have you been putting off? Maybe you felt the nudge to start a ministry, to lead a Bible study, to share your faith with someone who needs to hear it. But you've been waiting. You've been telling yourself, I'll do it when the time is right. But here's what you need to understand. The time will never feel right. The conditions will never be perfect. If you wait for the perfect moment, you'll be waiting forever. And while we're waiting, life is moving. The world is changing. People around us are searching for truth, for hope, for something real. But if we're too busy waiting for the right time to step into our calling, we miss our chance to be the light they need. That's why urgency is so powerful. It wakes us up. It shakes us out of complacency. It forces us to ask, if not now, when? Think about it this way. If your house was on fire, would you casually walk out? Would you sit around and think, maybe I should leave in a few minutes? No, you'd act immediately. And in the same way, there's a spiritual urgency that we must recognize. There's a battle for souls happening right now. There's a need for truth, for boldness, for faith in action. And if we don't step up, who will? One of the biggest lies we believe is that we have time. We think, I'll grow in my faith later. I'll start living with purpose next year. But time is the one thing you can never get back. Every moment that passes is a moment lost. And here's the reality. When we live without urgency, we live without impact. Look at the difference between people who make things happen and people who watch things happen. The ones who make things happen have a deep sense of urgency. They know that waiting is not an option. They understand that their time is now. So I ask you, what is holding you back? Fear, doubt, the belief that you're not ready. Let me remind you of something powerful. God does not call the qualified. He qualifies the called. You don't need to have it all figured out. You don't need to feel ready. You just need to move. You need to trust that when you take that first step, God will guide you the rest of the way. And listen, urgency doesn't mean panic. It doesn't mean rushing without purpose. It means moving with intention. It means waking up every morning and asking, how can I serve God today? How can I step into my calling right now? It's about making decisions that align with your faith, about choosing action over hesitation. There's a reason why this message is important before February 28th, 2025, because we are entering a time where bold faith is needed more than ever. The world is full of noise, distractions, and confusion, but as believers, we are called to be different. We are called to stand firm, to lead with faith, to act with urgency. This is not a time to be passive. This is a time to rise. So here's what I challenge you to do. Make a decision today. Decide that you will no longer wait for the perfect moment. Decide that you will step into your faith with urgency. Decide that you will not let another day go by without moving toward the calling God has placed on your life. Because when you do that, everything changes. Your faith becomes stronger, your impact becomes greater, and you start living the life you were meant to live. The choice is yours. Will you wait, or will you step forward in faith? Because now is the time. Not tomorrow, not next week, now. Faith is not just something we believe, it's something we do. It's the driving force behind every decision, every action, every moment of our lives. Too often, people treat faith as a feeling, something that's there when they need comfort, something they turn to in times of crisis. But faith was never meant to be passive. It was meant to be the fuel that propels us forward, the foundation that supports everything we build, the power that transforms not just our lives, but the lives of those around us. Look at the way Jesus lived. He didn't just speak about faith, he demonstrated it. He healed the sick, fed the hungry, confronted injustice, and showed love to the broken. He didn't wait for the perfect moment to act. He moved with purpose every single day. That's what faith in action looks like. It's about living in a way that reflects what we believe. It's about making choices that align with God's will. It's about stepping out even when we don't have all the answers, trusting that God will meet us in the movement. One of the biggest traps believers fall into is thinking that faith is simply about knowing the right things. Reading the Bible is essential. Prayer is essential. But if we stop there, we're missing the point. James 2:17 says, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. That's a strong statement. It means that belief alone isn't enough. If our faith isn't driving us to move, to serve, to make an impact, then it's not living faith, it's just words. Think about Peter walking on water. When Jesus called him out of the boat, Peter had a choice. He could have said, I believe you, Lord, but I'll stay right here where it's safe. That's what a lot of us do. We say we trust God, but we never step out of the boat. We never take the risk. We never move. But Peter did something different. He put his faith into action. He stepped forward, not knowing how it would work, but trusting that Jesus would sustain him. And he did walk on water until he let fear take over. That's another lesson. The moment we take our eyes off Jesus, the moment we let fear, doubt, and distractions get in the way, we start to sink. But even then, Jesus is there to lift us up. The key is that Peter took the step. He didn't just believe, he acted. And that's what we are called to do every single day. We have opportunities to put our faith into action. It's in the way we treat people, in the way we handle challenges, in the way we use our gifts to serve others. It's in the small decisions, choosing kindness over anger, choosing integrity over shortcuts, choosing to trust God even when circumstances seem uncertain. And it's in the big decisions, choosing to step into a calling, to take a leap of faith, to stand boldly for what is right, even when it's difficult. But here's what stops most people: fear. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of not being good enough. Let me tell you something, fear is a liar. Fear will always try to keep you stuck, keep you small, keep you from stepping into the fullness of what God has for you. But faith and fear cannot operate in the same space. You have to choose which one will lead you. When David faced Goliath, he didn't wait for someone else to step up. He didn't sit back and hope the problem would go away. He didn't let fear paralyze him. He moved. He ran toward the battle. That's faith in action. That's what courage looks like. And because he moved, because he took action, because he trusted God, he saw victory. The same applies to us. If we want to see breakthrough in our lives, we have to stop waiting and start moving. Stop waiting for the perfect moment. It will never come. Stop waiting to feel ready. You will never feel ready. Stop waiting for someone else to do what God has called you to do. Your faith is meant to be lived. Your purpose is meant to be walked out. And the world needs what you have to offer. It's not just about personal impact either. Faith in action changes communities. When the early church started, they didn't just gather to hear teachings and then go home. They fed the poor. They took care of widows and orphans. They stood boldly in the face of persecution. Their faith wasn't just something they believed. It was something they lived. And because of that, the church grew. The message of Jesus spread and lives were changed forever. Now, ask yourself, what would happen if you lived that way? What would happen if instead of just talking about faith, you truly lived it? What would happen if you stopped letting fear hold you back and stepped fully into the calling God has placed on your life? How many people could you impact? How many lives could be transformed? Faith in action means being the person who steps up when no one else will. It means being the one who offers hope in a hopeless world. It means living in a way that makes people see Jesus through you, not just in words, but in deeds. It means not just believing that God can do great things, but actually moving in a way that expects him to. The truth is, there is no such thing as a passive Christian. We are either moving forward or falling back. We are either walking in faith or standing still in fear. And time is too short. The need is too great. The mission is too important to waste another moment just thinking about faith. It's time to live it. It's time to step out. It's time to move. Because when you do, you will see God move in ways you never imagined. and you will experience the fullness of what it means to walk by faith, not just talk about it. Many Christians live their lives trapped by invisible barriers, fears, doubts, past mistakes, and limiting beliefs that hold them back from fully stepping into God's purpose. These barriers are not physical, but they are just as real. They stop people from living boldly, from sharing their faith, from using their gifts, from fully trusting God. The sad truth is that too many believers settle for a limited version of the life they were meant to live because they don't realize they have the power through faith to break free from these limitations. Think about how many people in the Bible faced what seemed like impossible limitations. Moses thought he couldn't lead because he wasn't a good speaker. Gideon believed he was too weak to be used by God. Peter let fear cause him to deny Jesus 3 times. Even Paul had a past filled with mistakes. But here's the key. None of these limitations were real in God's eyes. They were only real in the minds of the people who believed them. The moment they stopped believing in their limitations and started believing in God's power, everything changed. They stepped into their calling. They became bold, fearless, unstoppable. And that same transformation is available to every believer today. The first step to breaking through spiritual limitation is recognizing that it is not from God. God has not given us a spirit of fear. He has not called us to live in insecurity. He has not created us to be weak or powerless. Any thought, belief, or feeling that tells you that you are not capable, that you are not good enough, that you are not strong enough is a lie. It is a deception meant to keep you from stepping into what God has for you. One of the biggest limitations Christians struggle with is fear. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of not measuring up. But fear is only powerful if you allow it to be. Fear only controls you if you submit to it. The moment you decide that your faith is stronger than your fear, you break the power it has over you. You realize that fear is nothing but a shadow, an illusion, and that God's truth is greater. The Bible tells us over and over again, do not fear. Why? Because fear is the number one tool the enemy uses to keep believers from moving forward. Another major limitation is doubt. Doubting God's plan, doubting his timing, doubting your own ability to fulfill the calling he has placed on your life. But doubt, like fear, only has power if you feed it. And what you feed grows. If you constantly feed your doubt by overanalyzing, by focusing on what could go wrong, by believing that you need to have everything figured out before you move, you will stay stuck. But if you feed your faith by stepping out, by trusting God even when you don't have all the answers, by believing in his promises, you will see breakthrough. You will start to see that doubt was never meant to be a prison, but a test of whether you will believe in your own limitations or in God's unlimited power. Past mistakes are another major limitation. So many people believe they are disqualified from their calling because of things they have done in the past. They carry guilt, shame, and regret, and it holds them back from stepping into what God has for them. But let me tell you something. God does not see you through the lens of your past. He sees you through the lens of grace. He sees you through the lens of potential. If God only used perfect people, he wouldn't use anyone. Every person he has ever called has had a past. But their past did not define them. God's purpose did. David was an adulterer and a murderer, yet God called him a man after his own heart. Paul persecuted Christians, yet God used him to spread the gospel to the world. Peter denied Jesus, yet Jesus still built his church on him. Why? Because God does not define you by where you've been. He defines you by where he is calling you to go. The only thing keeping you tied to your past is your own unwillingness to let go of it. The moment you surrender your past to God, you are free to walk into your future. Another limitation that holds believers back is comfort. This is a dangerous one because it doesn't feel like a limitation. It feels like security. It feels safe. But the reality is, comfort is one of the greatest enemies of growth. Comfort keeps people from stepping out in faith. Comfort keeps people from taking risks. Comfort keeps people from growing into the leaders, the warriors, the world changers that God has called them to be. The greatest moments of breakthrough happen outside of the comfort zone. Jesus never called his disciples to a life of comfort. He called them to a life of faith, and faith always requires stepping into the unknown. So the question is, what is limiting you? What is keeping you from fully stepping into your calling? Is it fear, doubt, your past, a need for comfort and security? Whatever it is, you have the power to break free. And the way you break free is simple. You stop believing in the limitation and start believing in God's power. You stop focusing on what you can't do and start focusing on what He can do through you. You stop letting your circumstances define you and start letting your faith define you. Every great leader, every strong believer, every person who has ever made an impact had to face their limitations and decide to break through them. And now it's your turn. What will you choose? Will you stay trapped by fear, doubt, and insecurity, or will you rise up, step forward, and claim the life God has for you? The choice is yours. But know this, on the other side of your breakthrough is a life greater than you can imagine. A life of boldness, a life of purpose, a life that shines so brightly that others are drawn to the light of Christ in you. The moment you decide that you will no longer be held back by the lies of limitation, you become unstoppable. Because when faith replaces fear, when confidence replaces doubt, when God's grace replaces your past, you step into a new level of power. You become the person God created you to be. And when you live in that place, nothing can stand in your way. It's time to break through. It's time to step up. It's time to walk in the fullness of your calling, because the only thing standing between you and the life God has for you is the decision to believe in His power more than your limit. The world is filled with voices, news, social media, opinions, distractions, pulling people in every direction. But as believers, we are called to hear one voice above all others, the voice of God. The ability to discern His voice is not just a skill, it is a necessity. It is what keeps us from being deceived, from being led astray, from making choices that take us further from our purpose. And yet so many Christians struggle with this. They wonder, how do I know if it's God speaking? How do I know what He wants me to do? The answer is simple, but it requires action. It requires intentionality. It requires tuning out the noise of the world and tuning into His presence. God is always speaking. He speaks through His word, through prayer, through circumstances, through the Holy Spirit. But the problem is, most people are too distracted to hear Him. Think about it. When was the last time you sat in silence, without your phone, without distractions, just to listen? When was the last time you prayed, not just to ask for things, but to truly seek His guidance? We live in a culture that values speed, instant answers, constant stimulation. But God often speaks in the stillness, in the quiet moments when we actually take time to listen. That's why so many people feel distant from Him, not because He isn't speaking, but because they aren't listening. One of the most powerful ways to hear God is through His word. The Bible is not just a book, it is alive. It is God's direct communication with us. Yet many believers neglect it. They pray for answers, for direction, for wisdom, but they never open the very book where God has already provided those things. Psalm 119, 105 says, "Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path." That means if you feel lost, if you don't know what direction to take, His word is what will guide you. It is impossible to be truly connected to God's voice while being disconnected from His word. Prayer is another key, but prayer is not just talking, it's also listening. Too often people treat prayer like a one-sided conversation. They go to God with a list of requests, but they never stop to hear His response. Imagine if you had a friend who only talked to you when they needed something, but never listened to what you had to say. That's how many people treat their relationship with God. But when we make space for silence in prayer, when we quiet our hearts and say, "Lord, speak, I am listening," He does. Sometimes it's through a scripture that comes to mind. Sometimes it's through a strong conviction in our spirit. Sometimes it's through circumstances He orchestrates in our lives. But He speaks. One of the biggest challenges in hearing God is discerning His voice from all the other voices. There's the voice of the world telling you to chase success, to compromise your faith, to seek comfort over calling. There's the voice of the enemy, whispering lies, trying to plant fear, doubt, and insecurity. There's your own voice, influenced by emotions, desires, and past experiences. So how do you know which voice is God's? The answer is alignment. God's voice will never contradict His word. He will never tell you to do something that goes against His character. He will never lead you into sin, into confusion, or into fear. If the voice you're hearing does not align with Scripture, it is not from God. Another way to discern God's voice is through peace. Colossians 3:15 says, "Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts." That means when God speaks, there is peace, even if what He's calling you to do is difficult. It doesn't mean there won't be challenges, but it means that deep inside you will know that you are on the right path. On the other hand, if you feel confusion, restlessness, or constant doubt, it's a sign that you need to seek more clarity from Him. Obedience is a crucial part of hearing God. Many times people don't hear from Him because they haven't obeyed what he's already told them. Why would God give you new instructions if you haven't followed the last ones? If you have been feeling distant from him, ask yourself, is there something he has already told me to do that I have ignored? Maybe he has put it on your heart to forgive someone, to step into a new calling, to walk away from a certain sin, but you've resisted. When we ignore God's voice, our hearts become hardened, and it becomes harder to hear him. But when we obey, we open the door for him to speak even more clearly. Hearing God is not about waiting for an audible voice from heaven. It's about developing a relationship with him so strong that his voice becomes the loudest one in your life. It's about knowing his word so deeply that you recognize when he is leading you. It's about staying in prayer, not just when you need something, but because you want to be close to him. It's about obedience, because when you walk in obedience, you position yourself to receive even greater clarity from him. The world is full of distractions, full of noise, full of voices competing for your attention. But at the end of the day, there is only one voice that truly matters. And the question is, are you listening? Are you making space in your life to hear God? Are you spending time in his word, in prayer and worship, in stillness? Because he is speaking. The only question is, will you be the one who hears him